Welcome to the Masters of Scale Cafe. We have our coffee here. You know, it's early in the day, right? It's breakfast, and you know why we're at a breakfast table, right? Because culture eats strategy for breakfast, right? We've heard this line, right?
That's good. Well, that's very
right?
good.
It's Peter Drucker is who it's attributed to, although it's not actually proven that it's Peter Drucker that it came from. And I was actually at an event where there were two CEOs who got into an argument over which one of them came up with it. None of these three here, but so everyone wants a piece of this culture conversation. You all have been in, as June said, been in the center of culture. What we're going to try to do here to keep it fluid is over coffee. People usually tell stories, so we're going to start with a story and ask each of you to tell a story and then talk about it a little bit, and then we'll each do stories in turns. We'll do 3 rounds of this. Is that okay? So Angela, do you want to start? Do you have a story about culture at Burberry or at Apple that was particularly evocative for you? Memorable?
Many, but one that comes to mind, though, was now, there were so many questions when they announced that I was leaving Burberry and going to Apple, and of course, they left 6 months in between, and so a lot of time for the 60,000 employees to really, kind of figure out who I was and why this girl from fashion was coming in, et cetera, and a lot of comments on how I was going to flip everything and change everything, and so I literally started my first week, and by the end of the week, the head of HR and the head of PR, they bring me this email, and they're like, would you sign this, and we're going to translate it into 30 languages and send it out to all the employees. It's like, we're in a YouTube, Instagram, WeChat world, and I'm going to send an email. And at Burberry, we had done videos every week and created apps so everyone could talk with each other. And so I said, let me think about it. Came back the next week, and they said, okay. I said, we're going to do a video. And they're like, okay, well, we have a studio over here, hair, makeup. I'm like, no. YouTube videos don't have studio lighting and hair and makeup. This has got to be authentic. We'll do it in my office with an iPhone. They reluctantly agreed, and I said it's going to be 3 minutes, 1 take, 3 thoughts, just a thank you. We're going to turn ourselves inside out because you need to tell us what Apple needs to be doing more of in your community. We're going to turn ourselves upside down because you have a voice and we want to hear you, but we didn't have the mechanisms. Great. Shooting the video. Halfway through, my phone rings, and it's my youngest daughter. I just picked it up. You okay? Yeah, great. I'll call you back in 2 seconds. Finish the video. Now, this is Apple. Everything has to be perfect. And I said, no, send it out. And it was a bit of a battle. Send it out.
With your daughter in it?
Absolutely. I said 1 take. It has to be authentic. And it had to be, so they sent it out. And literally the next couple of days, thousands of emails thanking them for communicating on video because they could feel me, thanking me for wanting to hear their voice, but most importantly, thanking me for taking my daughter's call because it proved I was a human. But it helped set the culture. It helped galvanize the teams and make them realize, I'm just like they are. I'm just a part of the team.
So as you guys hear the story, is there a thought, an insight, a question, whatever that you...
I think for me, it reminds me of a lot of conversations I've had with my leadership team, which is there's a distinction between management and leadership. Right? Management's about the head. I might be someone's manager because of the org chart. Mm-hmm. The leadership can come from any place, right? Leadership is about the heart. And it reminds me of the authenticity that you bring, Vic. Was the leadership style one that was more about the head and then you had to bring the heart into it, or did that play into how you thought about culture change?
Yeah. It's interesting because I always said that I thanked Steve for me turning around Burberry because we were the first to buy the iPads and digitize everything in the stores, et cetera. So I was a pretty good student on the company, and very quickly I learned that all of those retail employees, they just revered Steve. And he told them they weren't allowed to sell, that their job was to enrich lives, and they needed to do it through the lens of education through his products. And so I knew that culture, already existed. And so I just honored it. I just said that I'm only going to pick up where he left off and take it to the next level because I want to make him proud. And so I think when you're creating a culture, it's different if you're a founder, but when you walk into something so big and so perfect and so successful, it's not about me. It's about me becoming a part of it and just evolving it and making it better.
Awesome.
Eric, do you have?
I wrote a book about Bill Campbell, my coach. You guys knew Bill both well. And he spent half of his time working with us. But what he really did is he fulfilled the human mission that we as executives kept forgetting. And what I learned from Bill is you have to actually spend some time on this. So now what has happened is there's been this view that you should bring your whole self to work. And now we're being forced to crawl that back because your whole self is maybe not what we want in work. And so I think that the story you told is exactly correct, but you could imagine variants of it which would be not correct. And we're navigating a new world of that perception.
About how did you struggle with that, about how far you go? How much you bring or show of yourself?
No, because again, I took the job at an older stage in life. I wasn't a kid. And luckily I had done a couple of things before Apple that had turned out pretty good. And so you learn, and my thing is I always say the higher up you go, the more authentic and the more human you need to be, where I think it's often the opposite, and ego kicks in. And it's like you said, it's not about managing. It's about inspiring and encouraging. And I've always said, I'm just the enabler. I'm the connector. I just bring in incredible people. We build a trusting relationship, and then they're empowered to go. I'm not the smartest tool in the shed.
And the universal law of management I've seen is the higher up you are in the organization, the less you really know about what's going on.
Absolutely.
Right? Like everyone talks to you in paragraphs, and there's a beginning and a middle and an end, and they prep, their prep sessions for the prep sessions. So I think you're absolutely right, which is the only way to get an organization to be authentic with you is if you take the first step and be completely authentic and transparent, because everyone's got a good BS meter, right? And if you as a leader are BSing your team, they're going to BS you right back. So I think that authentic leadership and really opening up to them, it's hugely important.
And especially when you're doing with 60,000 people around the world. This was long before this hybrid thing we talk about, right? We were already hybrid, any global business, right?
So, Dara, I'm curious about whether you have a story, because you're mentioning sort of whether you get all the information you need. You came into Uber, and there were cultural challenges. Is there a story that you have for us?
Yeah. This is only for half an hour. Let's
make the list.
Yeah, exactly. For me, one is that we're still going through that cultural journey. So we're not done by a long shot. And I think that you can never say, hey, put a pin in it, we're done. The minute you're done, you're done. You're in a really bad spot, actually, I think. But for me, one story that stands out was weekly all hands. We do weekly all hands in front of all employees, and we answer a bunch of questions. And Uber, of course, was this enormously successful company that ran into real cultural issues and was trying to relate to that, because when I met the team, it's a group of people who really wanted to have terrific impact. These were not bad people by any means. And there was a lot of the culture that was great, but then some issues that were problematic. And at this all hands, a question that was voted up was, what are we going to do about our PR problem? We were in the news constantly about one issue after the other. And I got up in front of the company and I said, listen, we don't have a PR problem. We've got an us problem. First we have to fix ourselves, how we act, who we promote, etc. Then the PR can follow, because ultimately, especially in this world, the substance always comes out. You can't pretend anymore. So I think that was a pretty important moment where I said those words in front of the company, and that opened the door for us to start making some significant changes. But we are still on the journey. We've got a long way to go.
Eric, what are you thinking hearing this story from Dara?
The problem that you were doing is a turnaround, whether you called it a turnaround or not. And turnarounds are just different, right? And you have to get everyone's attention on the short term. You need to make clear what the goals are, and you need to deal with all the people issues, which you undoubtedly inherited. And I think that that your example is just one of the 20 things you got to get right, which of course you did. Boom, 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 boom. Right? It's a real test of leadership.
Yeah. Well, it's a question sometimes too about like, what have the culture changes and what have the people changed? Like, are there people you have to move? Or do you just have to adjust the environment so those people operate in a different area? And I don't know how you answer that question.
It's actually funny. One of my favorite pieces of advice, and this is going to sound pretty twisted, of one of my mentors, when I got a new job, I said, what's the first thing I should do? He said, fire someone. And what he meant was, that's when people start taking it seriously. You know, your team's going to kind of listen and they're going to go right back to what they were doing. The minute when you actually make painful changes is when the organization in a turnaround knows you're that serious.
By the way, the number is 80% of the management team will turn over in a turnaround. It's just a question of what the rate is.
How soon it happens.
Yeah.
Yeah. We're at about 50-50, so we're okay. And everyone's staying. No one else is going. So.
I mean, Angela, you had to do a turnaround at Burberry and had some difficult kinds of conversations, not unlike Dora's talking about.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think like you said, you know, you pull everybody together. You got to be transparent, and you can tell by looking in the audience at your top 100 who's going to be on your team and who's aligned to your strategy and vision, and not mine, by the way, the one the team had put together. And funny, my first offsite at Burberry, literally, 3 days in. And I looked out in the audience and I said, I can tell you right now who's not on board. And I am very happy to give you an incredible package. Will be a great reference for you. But everybody needs to be 100% in or we're not going to win.
I'm curious as to what Eric said. You know, for Uber, it was pretty clear as a turnaround. For coming into Apple from Burberry, it wasn't, did you have to state whether this was a turnaround or keep going the way you're going, et cetera? Did you have to put that down?
Yeah, no, I said the opposite. Okay. I said, again, the most successful retailer on the planet, 5 times the productivity of any of its closest peers. And so, no, I had to honor and respect what was built and say, might sound odd, but I don't know what to do. So together, you know, you're on the front line. And that's why we're going to put all these communications in place so you can tell us and you can problem solve. And so almost the opposite. And I said, I know there's things we can do better inside of the store. So what are those? And I know that, well, we actually did a huge crowdsourcing exercise with, and the teams kept growing as we were rolling out more stores. And we said, in order to inform the new in-store experience, we asked them over the course of 6 months, what did they feel Apple should be doing more of in their community? And that's when that informed the whole experience. But it involved them. So then when you launched it, I mean, you could ramp up to 20, 30,000 sessions a week, and they owned it because they were part of creating it.
But like, I'm curious, Dara, because like culture comes from the bottom, but also you're put in place to kind of change it from the top.
Yeah,
like, how do you balance those two things?
You know, it's a tough balance. We actually, you were talking about crowdsourcing. We originally crowdsourced the culture, the new culture of the company, because I had to move fast. Once in a while, I listened to Eric, and we wanted it to be. I was a bit of a foreigner there, right? I didn't know the company. I wanted to understand what the company thought. So we crowdsourced a good bit of our culture, bottoms up. And for me, there was a great outcome, which is the culture very importantly stated what we weren't, because the company really wanted to separate itself from the past. There were some parts of the culture, we make big bold bets, et cetera, that we retained. But at the same time, because it was crowdsourced, it didn't have a strong enough point of view, in my opinion. Because, if you crowdsource, if you get the average of 20,000 people what their opinions are, you kind of get to the average opinion.
You're not getting the top 10.
You're not getting, the really juicy stuff, what makes it different. So we've actually now revisited our cultural norms, and some of them we've kept. But I found that it's a combination of bottoms up, but then it does have to come top down as well. You've got to put your own stamp on the organization. I didn't have the permission to early on because Uber had such a strong culture, et cetera. Once I got there after a couple of years, I had the permission with my team. And now I think we're in a pretty good spot. But the journey keeps going.
There's as you're talking about, I'm reminded, so there's a book that Ed Catmull, the founder of Pixar, wrote called Creativity, Inc. I don't know if you guys have read it. Terrific book, and I read it, and then when I was the editor of Fast Company, I was like, this is what I want to follow, right? And I try to sort of create this culture flywheel, you know, and then it would like drift back. And so I met Ed at one point, and I said, so Ed, like, what am I doing wrong? You know, like, why? And he's like, and he starts laughing at me. He's like, no, you got to muck out the stalls, like, over and over. People go back. And so I'm curious for you guys, like, how much of a culture is something that can be a flywheel, and how much do you have to keep, you know, like, you said you're only part of the way through, like, just keep at it.
Mm-hmm.
Well, remember that people opt in, right? So you have selection bias. So you have the people who chose to come, and the people who didn't like your culture are not there. Right, so you have to always start with the premise that there's a reason why people are here, right? And you better validate it, and then you need to figure out how you want. And this is exactly what you said. And both you actually said. Then you have to figure out what the touch points. One way to say this is to say we like to win, right? And what is it going to take to win? And one of the things I learned from Larry and Sergey is to be impatient about that, right? Whatever idea I had was not good enough. Whatever idea anybody else had was not good enough. It was always not good enough. And that drive for excellence is what leadership really is about.
I mean,
no, I was just going to say, and I think too, I agree 100%, but I think also as you're scaling, right? So Burberry was relatively small. And so as you scale and you're bringing in thousands of people a year, how do they know what of course you want to hire for it, but there's so many new people coming in. So we discovered at Burberry and at Apple that you actually had to document it. We brought in a cultural anthropologist to study everything that we had done. We doubled the business. We said we were going to do it again. What did we learn? What did we want to make sure gets embedded in onboarding, et cetera? So kind of the same thing at Apple. I mean, we did the same thing, but you know, there's a financial report, there's a supply report, there's an environmental report. So we actually created the first human responsibility report to share, you know, what we were doing with this culture, how we were keeping this momentum, and that way there was no ambiguity in terms of like expectations, performance or otherwise.
Let me give you a Google example in my first year. So at the time the company was in one building, and I had an 8x12 office, and I had a little desk and a door to the office. And one day I walk in and someone has moved into my office, okay, with me. And I said, hello, and he goes, hello. And I said, who are you? And he goes, I'm Amit. And I said, what are you doing here? In a nice way. And he said, well, I was one of the 5 people in the office across the hallway, and you're never here, so I just moved myself. Now, because of my previous errors at Novell, I knew that this was a test. Okay? Okay? And you know when you're being tested, it's like, I'm being tested. Think, Eric. Think. Okay? So I said, did anyone authorize that? In a nice way, did anyone authorize? He said, sure. Wayne Rosing, who's the VP of engineering, said, sure, move into the CEO's office. And I said, okay, I'm screwed. So anyway, so he puts his headphones on and he's typing away doing whatever. And so he was, you know, he's an engineer, he doesn't say anything, perfectly fine roommate, works all the time. So I'm sitting there and I'm on the phone with Omid, who was the VP of sales at the time. And I'm having this conversation, and Omid is saying, I think that the revenue numbers at the time were about 100 million a quarter. And he said, I think we can get to 120. And I said, I think you're sandbagging, Omid. I think you can, you know what the technical term sandbagging. We ultimately gave Omid a sandbag to stand on to make his presentation, which I have a picture of, which is hilarious. But in any case, I'm sitting there talking to him, and he said, yeah. And so it's an unsuccessful phone call. So I hang up the phone, and Amit next to me takes off his headphones and says, I know the revenue numbers. And I go, I knew you were listening into my phone call. So I said, what's the revenue number? And he goes, it's 142 million. And I said, well, how do you know? I said, I do revenue analytics. And I thought, maybe I should have talked to my office mate. So I call Omid, the sales guy, and I say, Omid, you're sandbagging. you have another 12 million in the bag. You just haven't found it yet. He said, how do you know? And he said, I'm not telling you. So all of a sudden, and by the way, the revenue number really was 142 million. I discovered having the chief revenue analytics guy in my office at all times is a great idea. We stay, right? Running a small company.
So, note to self.
Note to self. So the interesting story is that we actually liked each other so much that he stayed as my office mate until we were a public company where I couldn't violate the various SEC laws. So So then I thought, how can I get the same thing? And so I had a small office and I had a larger office and I put 4 physicists next to me. And I said, your job is to notice something strange and you run into my office. So in 2008, whatever it is, the May of 2008 or 9, whichever the month and year was, they run in and they say, something strange. These are the physicists. And I go, okay, this is why we have physicists. And that was the beginning of that crisis. So I learned something, which was keeping these kinds of people around and close to you is really helpful. And plus, you know, if he moves in, don't say, what the fuck you do? I'm sorry.
Well,
do not commit cultural faux pas.
Yeah.
I mean, I think one of the fascinating things about culture is, right, like every organization has a culture, right? Some of it's articulated, some of it's by design, some of it's intentional, but some of it is just evolves. I mean, you know, and you don't necessarily know where it comes from. I know we only have a few minutes left, but I wanted to ask each of you, do you have a lesson for the folks out here, the folks who are watching, about something that when they get back to their office, you know, that they should do that will improve their organization's culture, something they should keep in mind, something they should act on now?
I'll give a little bit of an anti-lesson, call it, which is it goes to all the advice that you took. You can take all the advice, but ultimately don't try to be someone else. Be authentic to yourself. I still remember I read I think it was like a Forbes article about this manager who walked the halls. You know, he managed by walking the halls, and that's how he found out what was really going on at the company. I'm like, I'm going to walk the halls. So I started, I'm pretty structured. I started booking kind of walk the halls time. And I started walking the halls, and it was so awkward. Like it was, you know, I'd be like, what are you doing? Exactly. You're like, I'm working, like get out of here. Or I'd like go into, you know, a conference room and dead silence, you know, how's it going, everyone? So I just started hating walking the halls. And my assistant, she like saw how much I hated it. So she took glee. She's like, Dar, it's time to walk the halls, you know? And so eventually, like I could listen, it profoundly didn't work for me. Now, I'm sure, you know, I would say walk the halls is good advice, but I do think it goes to what you started with, which is ultimately whatever you do, whatever advice you choose to take, whatever fits in with you, you've got to be authentic. And only if you're authentic can you then affect authentic change with an organization.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that, you know, it's funny because it's often the word culture, it's like, you know, as humans, we come up with these words, metaverse, and, you know, and not everybody knows exactly what they mean. And so, but culture is kind of one of those words. And so I just used to always say, you know, everybody has an individual personality, and it's simply the personality of the company. And to me, it's no different than the Warriors winning or a great rock band. It's, you know, when you have a team whose values are aligned and they trust each other, and it's just natural handoffs. But then when you have that incredible foundation of trust, it just unlocks the creative thinking. It unlocks the innovation. And you know, that's that old adage, success breeds success. So to me, it's just, you know, understand that the culture is a giant personality, and it's living and breathing and goes up and down, but it is just constant, consistent, authentic communication and listening. I mean, and it's not your culture. Even if you're a founder, this thing will take on a life of its own, and, you know, hold on for the ride and keep pace as things change. I mean, you know, just with technology, with everything, because they can't go home and live one way and come into your culture and live another way. And so
You said if a person in our audience goes back to the office, whatever, let's say they're doing a startup, the answer is simple. Hire the smartest people you possibly can and put up with them, right? And we all understand what that means, right? But you really need them for competitive advantage. But let's say you have an established organization that you're managing, doing the best you can. The best way to do it is to say, are we at the state of the art? Are we using best practices? And then let them answer that question. What you discover is that your employees are all part of a network of people that you don't know. They actually know what else is going on, even if you don't. So if you just listen to them and say, okay, how do we get there? You end up with roughly the right outcome.
Yeah.
Well, were you going to say something?
I do think on surrounding yourself with the smartest people, that is absolutely no regrets. And like you said, the smartest people in an organization have followership.
Yes.
So anything that you do with them, et cetera, has echo effects. And I think on the cultural side, that can turn, if the smartest person in the organization isn't aligned with you culturally, that can actually be pretty dangerous. And so as an organization grows, you make allowances certainly for your most talented people. But if from a cultural standpoint, they're not aligned with you, that can be quite destructive.
And at a certain point,
exactly. Yeah. He's exactly right.
Yeah.
Well, guys, I have a whole bunch of other questions to ask you, and I've loved being here at the Master Scale Cafe with you, but they have not brought us our breakfast food yet, and so I think maybe we should go eat somewhere else. This has been great. I'm sorry that we're out of time. Thanks so much for doing this.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That's great. Thanks, everybody.
What's said at the summit stays at the summit.
Everybody will have to pay attention.
Almost no one sees this coming. Those founders are becoming more globally ambitious. They're coming after your talent, your capital, your market share.
The difficulty is when a team has been working so hard on one thing.
If you are trying to use your time and your talent and your money in the service of others, the work will never end.
We have to deal with inequities.
It's different if you're a founder, but when you walk into something so big and so perfect and so successful, it's not about me. It's about me becoming a part of it and just evolving it and making it better.
The thing that I love about it, and that makes me so optimistic, is that it's just creating more dialogue.
I'm here to tell you that, wow, human innovation's incredible.
This is Masters of Scale Summit.